Hi all, Vaden here with a quick solo intro on a somber note. So a major theme of this podcast is the importance of being able to disagree with your friends. And so on that theme, I want to quickly tell you a story about one friend of mine named Izzy, who I love with all my heart. Izzy is Palestinian, and her family lives in Gaza. And we have very different views regarding this war. So I'm coming more from a Sam Harris perspective. She's coming more from a Dr. Gabor Mate perspective. And we've had many enjoyable evenings discussing these differences over dinner. On Saturday, May 24th, 2025, Izzy's sister, Dr. Alaa Al-Najjar, lost 9 of her 10 children to an Israeli airstrike. The story has become international news, and I'll read the first paragraph of the Guardian article which broke the story. Dr. Alaa Al-Najjar, a pediatric specialist in Al Tahrir Hospital within the Nasser Medical Complex, was treating victims of an ongoing Israeli attack across Palestinian territory on Friday when she received the bodies of 9 of her children killed in a strike in Khan Yunis. The eldest of her children was 12. We've subsequently heard from Izzy that Dr. Alaa's son and husband are currently in the ICU, and so our heart goes out to them. I'll share some links and articles in the show notes below, but in particular, I'd just like to highlight one conversation with Izzy's brother, Dr. Alaa Al-Najjar, who gave an interview with an Irish radio program a few days after the tragedy. And the interview was beautiful and heartbreaking and compassionate, and I would recommend it to anyone who wants to learn more about this. So I don't know how to end this terrible war. I have nothing original to say on this topic. All I have to offer here are cliches and other people's opinions that are floating around my head. But if you're like me and you want to do something to help, I'd suggest the following. If you have the financial means, I've linked to a GoFundMe page for Izzy's sister below. Please donate. Both Helene and I have. If you don't have the financial means, or even if you do, then what I'd suggest is not posting to Instagram. Instagram encourages a lot of shouting into a void of people who already agree with you, but not a lot of listening to the other side. Instead, be like Izzy. Find a friend that you may disagree with and go for dinner with them and talk and listen and explain and try to understand. If you're pro-Israeli, listen to people like Norm Finkelstein and Dr. Gabor Mate and Izzy's brother. If you're pro-Palestinian, listen to people like Sam Harris and Natasha Hasdorf. Disagreement is hard and messy and emotional and frustrating. But, like anything, it's a practicable, learnable skill that gets easier with repetition. Disagreement is how we learn to understand ourselves, understand the world, and understand our closest friends. If we stop being able to talk to each other, then the only option left is to kill each other. So please, please, practice disagreement, people. And with that somber note, on with the episode. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so welcome back to round 2 of our reaction to Peter Boghossian's video, What's the Most Rational Way to Know? With Brett Hall, which is part of the Street Epistemology series. We introed it in the first video, so there's not too much to say here. Perhaps beyond that, we are recording this before the first of our reaction videos was released, so if we received any feedback, we will not be responding to that here. We're charging ahead, not knowing how the world will react to our reactions.
Or ever. We're never going to respond to any of the feedback. Yeah. Yeah, so we're kind of picking up right in the middle. So definitely go back and listen to the first episode. We're not going to do too much setup beyond just rewinding a little bit to get the beginning of Peter's comments where we left off. And without further context, let's get into it.
So you're trying to make a rational decision, assuming you're monogamous, of course. You're trying to make a rational decision to figure out if he's lying based upon the evidence that comes in, as opposed to, and you have this history with him. Does that example...
It depends upon the explanation I have of what's going on.
Well, his explanation for you is that he didn't want his friend's husband to find the condom, so he gave it to him at the last minute, just slipped it to him.
Okay, then that's the explanation. Then yes, I accept the explanation, and It's not a matter of confidence. I have no compete.
But you have to be. So are you 100% positive that he's telling you the truth?
Never.
Okay, are you 80? Are you okay? So the moment that you say that, then anything other than 100, the moment that you admit that, you're talking about confidence.
Make it a very, very clean example. This is why I like to always take epistemology from science, because it's just so clean. And so
I was thinking real life, but give me the example.
These are real life, but it's just like, you either have a good explanation or not. Okay, so the creationists come along and they point to the fossils in the rocks and they go, look, evidence of a flood that happened 6,000 years ago where all the big animals sank into the mud.
Okay.
There's their evidence. How confident are they in that? It's utterly irrelevant to me how confident anyone happens to be in that theory when I know I'm not 100% sure, 80% sure, 50% sure, or anything like that. I can't put a number, because when people say that, they're pulling numbers out of their ass, literally. There's no way of you being able to say I'm 100% versus 80%. There is no
Yeah, just something to add here. So we talked about this whole segment at the very end of our last episode. And I'll try not to repeat myself. But I think it's very easy to use the language of confidence without having to necessarily use numbers. So if I say to you, I'm like 99% confident, what I mean to say is that of the set of things I believe to be true, this ranks pretty highly at the top. So you can always talk about confidence of particular propositions being more or less than the confidence in other propositions. You can kind of rank them, right? You can't do it precisely, you can't do it quantitatively, but it makes perfect sense to say, like, yeah, I'm about as sure that you've cheated on me given the evidence of seeing the condoms in your pocket and the lies that seem to be coming from your mouth as I am that the world is round. And you can make that statement without invoking numbers and being completely coherent, I think. Would you agree that that's a coherent thing to say?
Yeah, I agree that's coherent, and I think is the position we're all in most of the time, right? When you ask for a layperson's confidence in something, they very rarely give you a number. Most of the time, they just sort of give you some sort of qualitative gut feeling. I think there is interesting territory to explore around to what degree someone's confidence should matter to you. So I view Brett here to be on the extreme end of the spectrum, saying no one's confidence in any assertion matters at all, right, when I'm evaluating their claims. And I mean, that is a healthy position to have to some extent, especially as we were discussing last time when it comes to like object level scientific disagreements, right? So like if we disagree about a claim and there's a way to test that claim right now, clearly either of our confidences in any various proposition ceases to matter, because we go out, we test the claim, and then we adjudicate the result. But you know, life is rarely so clean, and there are times when we're just trusting people. You might be trusting your local epidemiologist about how bad this season's flu strain is to determine if you're like gonna get your flu shot next week, you're gonna wait till next, if you're gonna get your flu shot this week, or if you're gonna wait till next week or something to get your flu shot. And I think like trust is sort of just built into how society operates, and part of that trust is like listening to and leveraging experts' confidence in domains where you trust them. And so again, this isn't to say you can make this process formal by any means, but I think there is some nuance here around implicitly you are listening to people's confidence quite often if you take what they say, right? Like if you come out, we're having some disagreement and you come out of the gate very strongly for a position, and you cite some evidence, and you say, I just listened to this, or I just read this, and I'm extremely sure that some historical fact holds. That is a relevant variable 100% for me, unless I have reason to like doubt that very specific claim, right? But if that's sort of like a tangential claim or just like a supporting point you're making, I probably will listen to that, as opposed to if you were like, I'm not quite sure, but I think the U.S. was founded in 1776, but I'm not super sure.
Yeah, there's a lot to comment there. That's awesome. I guess the first thing I want to say is that Bayesianism and empiricism, which preceded it, had done such a disservice because it tied epistemology and truth so tightly to the language of confidence and numbers. And it's like, here's a formalization of how you can go from confidence to truth. And that's just all wrong for reasons we've talked about ad nauseum. For listeners of the podcast who want to hear more about that, there's a now YouTube playlist called like the Bayes versus Popper series or something, so you can listen to all of our stuff about Bayes. And Brett is pushing back against that. He's pushing back against that, and you can tell when he says like assigning numbers to stuff, which Peter did not do. He did not assign a number besides just colloquially saying 100% sure, etc. So let's grant that if Brett's target is Bayesianism, then I completely agree that confidence has no place in the role of science. But you and I are post-Bayes. Was that arrogant to say? We're not Bayesians. But I think one can go too far in one's critique of Bayesianism, as I think both Brett Hall and Deutsch do, which is to say that confidence is completely irrelevant all the time, forever, and should totally be ignored, and just like don't even tell me about your confidence. But like, as you said, like confidence is a hugely important decision-relevant piece of information that I would not want to ignore if you were offering it to me. And what Popper added to this conversation is that you kind of need to have like two things in mind at once. You need like confidence is valuable, but also the stakes are valuable. So if you say you are extremely confident that this vaccine will save this many lives, and it's like you're very confident about this, but the stakes are so goddamn high, then again, I don't really give a shit about your confidence. I'm sorry, you got to give me something better than that. That doesn't matter. But if the stakes are like microscopic, if it's like, yeah, I'm really confident you're going to like this steak over this chicken dish, then that's enough for me to go on. I'm just going to use that. That's great. Confidence totally matters. It matters in the sense that you and I are debating all the time. Sometimes I'll say, I read this in a paper and yeah, I don't know if it's true. And that's just like a signal to you that if you want to critique me, the best way to critique me is probably here. In that spot I'm weakest at. It's a nice way to say to the person you're speaking to, like, here's where my weaknesses are. I don't know if I don't know if my argument is robust, but because we're both truth seeking, when I say I'm not really sure about something, that's like putting a big red bullseye and say, okay, attack me in this spot. I haven't looked here. If I say I'm super confident about something, of course I could be wrong, totally. But it would behoove you to probably not attack that spot unless there's other argumentative reasons why I'm not making any sense. Of course, it's just of the infinite number of things you can fact check, you don't have an infinite amount of time. And so like when I tell you I'm not confident about something, I'm trying to help my antagonists. I'm trying to say, here's where you should attack me. Attack me in this spot. This could be wrong. Go double check that. And so as a fallibilist who doesn't think that confidence should be completely rejected, I think that a fallibilist critical rationalist lens on what confidence is and the value that it can bring is just indicating your weak spots. That's what you want to be able to do. And of course, yes, I could say, here are the weaknesses in my arguments, and here's where the evidence I provided is weak. Let's do all that too. I'm not saying one versus the other, but it's just an extra component of information that I always try to provide to my interlocutors so that they know like what they can maybe say to somebody else. And if pressed, I will be able to give them a citation versus you should not say this to anybody until you double check this yourself, because I don't want to spread misinformation. And like, please do not repeat the thing I'm going to say because I'm not super confident on it. And don't tell it to somebody else before you double check. And so for all these reasons, I think confidence is a very important thing to preserve, as long as we excise all the numerical stuff, all of the conflating it with truth stuff, and include the idea of the stakes, because the stakes have to be included as well when thinking about confidence and decisions.
We should say, we should just say to their credit very briefly, like the Bayesians, this is what they're getting at when they're always talking about expected values. And, they put the expected value language on things, but a lot of it is just these gut hunches about like what the stakes are of this setting, right? Like the expected value is precisely weighing things by the stakes or the cost of the situation. And so, they're very rarely running around actually doing numerical calculations. They like to pretend they are, but that very rarely happens. But in conversation, when they're talking about expected values, this is sort of like the intuition that they're trying to get at.
Absolutely.
There's no metric of that. There is an explanation of things like what fossils are, namely which existed 62 plus million years ago.
So in part you're talking about Bayesian reasoning.
No, yeah, I'm rejecting Bayesian reasoning.
I understand that. Right, I understand it. So, okay, maybe that's the point of contention. If you were to accept Bayesian reasoning, so that's a new claim. If one accepts Bayesian reasoning, then it makes sense to view epistemology in terms of confidence.
You want to do that?
You want to do that? Let's do that one.
Well, if
one accepts Bayesian reasoning, it makes sense to
express things in terms of confidence. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so that means you're rejecting Bayesian reasoning.
For the audience who is listening and not watching, Brett moved from disagree to agree. So he agrees with that claim.
Yeah.
Okay, but there are competing explanations.
I have to do this. And for any listener who just tuned in and didn't listen to the previous episode, the format of the episode is such that there are tiles in a semicircle with strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree. And then when various questions are asked, Brett and Peter will walk to the place on the tile that aligns with their position and then debate it. So that's what I meant when I said he walked from spot 1 to spot 2.
Competing explanations for things. This is what I understand. There are competing explanations for things. Over time, we develop new technologies. We test hypotheses. Yes. We develop maybe, hopefully, theories. We refine our knowledge of the world. Maybe we find out that something was junk science or someone falsified their data or what have you. And so don't you have to have confidence in the explanations?
Specific examples are always really helpful here because when the Bayesians say, but we have a whole bunch of different explanations and we need to weigh our confidence in them. Firstly, there's
priors.
Priors, and we update our priors. Right. Update our priors often means create a new explanation wholesale. However, the case that we have more than one explanation in any given domain. Often we have zero. For example, what is dark energy? What is dark matter? No clue. No one has an idea. Or we have one explanation.
Don't people have all sorts of ideas about what this stuff is? Like, no one knows for sure, but there are certainly different explanations out there. God, I can't remember any of them, but fact check me, listeners. But I'm pretty sure there's different tentative theories about what dark matter is, what black energy or dark energy is, right?
I think we're way outside what I know about physics, though, to be honest.
Yeah, okay.
One explanation, in which case it's the only thing that we can make decisions on the basis of. You make a decision on the basis of the best explanation. Usually we only have one.
Sorry, that's just not true. You will give me an explanation and you'll give me some confidence, and sometimes I'll just listen to the confidence depending on the explanation and the stakes. Like, we've given examples before, but I don't know how Brett makes decisions in real life, but I don't think it maps onto how I make decisions in real life. And this ties into Hugo Mercier's work, actually, because he's all about how we have various mental sanity checks and filters, one of which is to defer to expertise, another of which is to defer to your social group. All of these are fallible, but all of these help to process information coming at us. And confidence is surely one of those. It's like I use that often. And just like any other heuristic, it's fallible. The Bayesian can never say that's fallible, but us critical rationalists who don't want to entirely do away with the notion of confidence have no problem using it as just yet another fallible information source that can help us make decisions.
In the rare case where we have two, the very rare case, we do what's called a crucial experiment, which rules out one. I began the conversation about Eddington's experiment ruling out Newtonian theory.
Okay, now, can I pause you right there? So let's say that you're at that juncture, and you're not sure which is which. Like you're a sincere inquirer, you're doing your best to figure it out, you don't think anybody's fabricated data. Wouldn't your confidence be 50-50 at that point in time?
But that is trying to express the worldview I'm saying in Bayesian terms. You could say that.
That's correct.
You could say that. You could say it's a 50-50, but then you're also wanting to say, I would want to bet money on each of these and I wouldn't bet money either way necessarily. I would expect not to win. But the more rational thing to do, rather than saying it's 50-50, is to say, I don't know.
I have no problem with that, but if there are only two possible explanations for a thing, and you say, I don't know, yes, it's honest, yes, it's the best response to that. We're pressed on that. If someone said, well, what do you think the odds of this are? Wouldn't your confidence have to be split?
It's never the
this maybe indicates just how deep Bayesianism goes. Would you agree? Like, I don't think Peter's a Bayesian necessarily, but he's intrinsically tying the notion of confidence to the notion of probability and to odds and to betting. And that is, I think, a huge mistake. And that's one of the areas where I just want to emphasize that you can be non-Bayesian, i.e. you can think that that move isn't valid, while still preserving notions of confidence. But just to say how much of that idea is in the culture, that probability equal belief equal confidence, even non-Bayesians, just intelligent, thoughtful interlocutors can still have that idea in their head, and that's just how deep that subject goes.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if it's about I don't think it's the deepness of the subject in that it's like been successfully promoted in culture. I think it speaks to the fact that Bayesianism is the most intuitive sort of epistemology. And I think someone has said this before, and I think this is basically true, where it's like, it's extremely natural to think about things in terms of uncertainty and belief and confidence. And it's extremely natural to take the next step of trying to quantify those because we have the word probability, which means so many different things. And so you kind of reach for the only tool that you have, and it's extremely natural to then, frame, your confidence in terms of bets, frame bets in terms of probabilities, and then start talking about, winning and odds and all this stuff based on that.
Yeah, maybe a plug to our 6th episode where we first started talking about probability, because we go right from the beginning of what do most people who haven't thought about the subject mean when they say, I'm probably going to get the job tomorrow? Often they mean, I'm pretty confident I'm going to get the job tomorrow. And in that linguistic usage is where the link is made. So I totally agree.
Case that there are only two possible explanations, but it is often not often the case, but it is rarely the case that there are only two explanations known. And the rational thing to do at that point is not to bet or to talk about probabilities, but rather to devise an experimental test which will distinguish between them.
So you
wholeheartedly agree with Brett on that point. That too much focus on confidence kind of paralyzes you, because very often you can just do something in the world that will immediately eliminate certain hypotheses. You don't need to spend all this time ruminating about what your confidence levels are. You can just take an action. And so I completely agree with Brett on that point.
You genuinely want to extirpate confidence from the soil of reasoning. You just want to completely uproot it.
Yes, because ultimately it's subjective. It's not objective. It is a feeling, an emotion, something that comes from our psychology. Bayesian reasoning ultimately is subjective, psychological, and not rational.
So when you're talking about applied epistemology, not the stuff...
The issue that Brett and critical rationalists in general just keep running into here is that accepting the best explanation is also a psychological phenomenon. And you can see that by just looking at different communities and asking yourself, what do they consider to be the best explanation here, right?
Nice.
And of course, when you're in one of those communities, you can take a step back and look at the other communities and say, well, they just aren't adopting the best explanation for any given phenomenon. There is a psychological element to rationality and epistemology. That doesn't mean that objective truth and reality don't exist, but in terms of us navigating the world and generating hypotheses and subscribing to those hypotheses, that is always going to have a subjective nature to it. So I mean, there's many other reasons to criticize Bayesianism and other flavors of rationality, but the fact that it bottoms out in some sort of subjectivity, I think is not the best route to go down.
Mm-hmm. Agree. Yeah.
That your fellow Australian Tim Van Gelder does at social epistemology. But when you're talking about the kind of stuff that we do on an individual level, do you think that the original framing, I can't remember what I was because I don't remember the original claim.
Can I ask you
something you want?
Yeah. So I've been sort of a bit harsh in giving you a nice clean example where I say, and I often go back to this example of, look, the purpose of the evidence is to decide between theories. Right, and so once you've got evidence,
or among,
very, very rarely you're going to have 3, 4, 5 different explanations. Again, the purpose of an experiment is to rule out
a universe from nothing. But go.
But what is an example drawn from science or elsewhere where you think that accumulating ever more evidence is going to increase your confidence?
Arthur Eddington's experiment that falsified Newtonian physics is an example where the accumulation of evidence increased the confidence in Arthur Eddington, in his paper. You can read his paper. because he didn't just get a single tile. He computed multiple tiles. And if he only had 2 tiles, he would be surely less confident in his results. You can look at the statistical analysis that he's done, and you can see pretty clearly that if he had a sample size that was much smaller, it just wouldn't have worked. And so Arthur Eddington is an example of someone, and the wider physics community is an example of people who had their confidence in the truth of general relativity slowly increase as more and more potential tests that would falsify it were passed. And so it's just in the very paper that Brett is referring to.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I think it's worth making the point that statistics as a field is sort of getting at this very question, right? This is what it means to have like a high-powered versus a low-powered study. So if you're interested in the question, is the average man as tall as the average woman? Like, is there a significant difference in size there, in height, or not, right? Are they the same on average? And if you only have 5 men and 5 women in front of you, it's extremely hard to say, right? Because this is an extremely small sample. And so what you need is more evidence, meaning more people, so you can run an actual like high-powered analysis and check if there's a significant difference between the 2 averages.
Exactly. Which is what Eddington did to see the difference between where the starlight was predicted to be and where the starlight actually was.
But what is the situation where...
Evolution? I mean, virtually anything you could think of does that.
But you only have one
at the Scopes monkey trial, just as an example, they don't have anywhere near the evidence that we have now for evolution.
I would just say the evidence there is irrelevant because your choice is between a very good explanation from Charles Darwin about the origin of species and
right.
Versus magic.
But there I go again with the...
But we only know it's a good explanation because of all the evidence that has accumulated over the years since the theory was developed. It's like, yeah, retrospectively, we can say we have only ever had one good explanation, but that's because there's 200 years of tests that have been run on that question. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, just try and apply this to the development of a vaccine or something, right? So you have some idea about human physiology and you have some mechanistic understanding of how viruses work. So you develop a vaccine to target a virus, given what you know about human physiology. You don't just frame this in terms of like, well, we have an explanation for how this thing works versus magic. Therefore, we're going to give this to everyone. What you do is run a huge clinical trial, which is evidence. This is an accumulation of evidence of whether this thing effectively targets the virus you're trying to target.
Yeah, and often, like, we don't even have an explanation, but yet we can still make a decision and do stuff. For example, vitamin C. So vitamin C, I think, was discovered to cure scurvy well before we understood how it worked. But we just knew that if you ate willow bark and had lemons and stuff, then your teeth wouldn't fall out. That's basically just explanationless predictive science in the way the Deutsch would say, because it could be God. It could be little sea mermaids that live in your blood that are causing them to like the vitamin C. But it doesn't really matter because we want to just have our teeth not fall out as much. And so it's just a prediction that if you eat this thing won't happen. And again, in the land of physics, where we're not looking for just predictions, we're looking to actually understand the world, that's not sufficient. But in the land of biology and health and medicine, sometimes it's more important to just save somebody's life than it is to necessarily figure out the true explanation of exactly what's happening. And in the scurvy example, like, yes, you can come up with some explanation in a vague kind of hand-wavy way, but my point here is that there'd be an infinite number of them that could suffice, but it doesn't really matter because you're saving people's lives. You're preventing oral surgery from needing to take place. And it's just another example where physics just is not the only source of intuition when thinking about epistemology.
Yeah. And so just to make it clear, I mean, what I'm not saying is that physics or that evidence isn't used to decide between theories, as Brett is saying, but I think it's often used for more than that as well. And like to ignore the additional roles that evidence has, both to help us develop new theories as evidence accumulates, and to corroborate theories, as Popper would put it, is to just ignore how science, I think, is done on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd maybe tweak, but this is very pedantic. I'd maybe tweak to say it does more than that. I think that Brett and Deutsch are right to say that ultimately it's about adjudicating between theories. It's just that in the examples we've given, you can map it back into adjudication land. So you could say that as more and more evidence accumulates for the vaccine prevents COVID theory, the other theory, which is that the vaccine doesn't prevent COVID, is now being eliminated. So yeah, you could always come up with a theory that's been eliminated. Yeah. And so it's true what they're saying. It's just that it's just like one lens to look on the situation. And in many cases, talking about accumulations of evidence is a one-to-one mapping with regards to the Popperian view. It's just different. It's like, do you want it to have your statement be a negation of a negation, or do you want it to be just not doubly negated?
So just to flesh that out a bit, but I think the important distinction that I think talking about, say, the accumulation of evidence gets at is that you might not always just be satisfied with the best explanation at the moment. So going back to the vaccine example, you might have run like a relatively small to medium-sized trial for a new vaccine, and perhaps it looks good based on initial results. And so at that given moment in time, you might have an explanation that, this vaccine works because it targets your A cells, which are doing B cell things, right? So that's your explanation, and it looks good based on the kind of evidence you have. So it seems to me that Brett is saying, under his sort of worldview, now that's the best explanation of the situation, and you go with that explanation until you have reason to doubt it, right? But that doesn't give you room to then step back and say, maybe we should just run more trials. Like, yeah, we don't have a second explanation that's as good, but, back to the point about your stakes, like, if we're going to roll out this vaccine, that's high stakes scenario. So you're damn well, you're going to run more trials with more numbers of people, and you're going to be slow and incremental in the rollout to make sure you don't hurt a bunch of people. And so, talking about accumulation of evidence gets at that sort of decision-making aspect of epistemology that I think is left out if you just talk about binary decisions, yes or no, do we know what's going on right now? Let's go with it, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Nice.
Again, with the confidence, maybe this is a criticism myself, or maybe it's not, but you would be far more confident in your explanation than the other explanation. I guess I'm trying to think, like, what would it even look like to not have confidence in anything? You could just, it just throws
question.
me.
Excellent question, Peter.
Just throws me into because epistemology, to me, the way I think about it at a non-social applied level of the individual, has to take in some kind of psychological disposition of the people, has to take in some kind of social phenomenon, degree of belonging, degree of, like, I don't have a sanitized...
Yeah, I just want to echo that what he's saying here is kind of what I was mentioning at the beginning of the last episode, which is that there's these, like, two levels at which one can and must think about science, like the formal apparatus and then the more squishy social human bit of it. And they're clearly still talking at different levels, but Peter's kind of emphasizing that distinction in his own words.
Platonic or just crystal clean view of applied epistemology, that's how I think about it.
I think so too. It's just that when talking examples, it's very easy to draw them out of science. And as you just said there, that, okay, we've got more, I agree with you, there is lots of evidence that we can talk about in the domain of evolution in order to show that this is a great explanation. But the point is, it is the only explanation. The other side, the creationists, have no explanation.
Okay. So let me, okay.
Also, I'm sure that would have been said before Dawkins, but then Dawkins very much refined the explanation from Darwin, right? The explanation itself refines and improves, broadens, changes, gets tweaked. Certain stuff is dropped out, certain stuff is included as different, let's say, evidence comes in, or different tests are run, or different thoughts are had. And so it's not nearly as clean as got the best explanation now, people, and we never need to reevaluate this again.
Yeah, nice. Do you think it's fair to, under a Popperian lens, just synonymize the word evidence with number of crucial tests passed?
Yeah, I pretty much do. If you obviously broaden, like so with the vaccine example, you can frame that in the language of crucial tests. You could say you're evaluating two theories. And so, yes, I think that is strictly true. I think of evidence as only counting if it risks falsifying. So evidence that doesn't have the possibility of falsifying isn't evidence. It's just
exactly
selection bias. Yeah.
Okay, so just run with me. Mm-hmm. We both agree with this. That's Haldane's the Precambrian rabbit. Find me a rabbit in the Precambrian age. This is how I think about it. I am extraordinarily confident of the facts of evolution. We frame it to you that way. But holy shit, we find a Precambrian rabbit. What you're laughing about? What?
I know the response to this.
Go ahead.
I will grant you.
No, go ahead.
If there is a rabbit found in the Precambrian, Haldane was wrong to say that this would be a refutation of evolution by natural selection. It will be a problem for evolution by natural selection because we could easily imagine a scenario where an isolated community of living organisms has evolved far more quickly towards rabbits than anywhere else on planet Earth. And so,
which is how the community of physicists treated Arthur Eddington's initial falsification of Newton. It created a problem for Newtonian physics. But people aren't going to just look at 9 dots of light on 9 plates and then completely wholesale switch their entire view of cosmology and of the bending of space-time and of relativity and all that. No, that took many decades of different kinds of tests and falsification events and yeah, each of these, quote, makes problems for the theory until eventually you have to completely destroy the theory, the Newtonian theory. But that, again, is kind of a Popperian way to describe what Peter's saying, which is that the confidence of the people goes up as more tests are run. These are two sides of the same coin.
Planet Earth. And so that would be the explanation of why the rabbit is there rather than refuting evolution by natural selection.
Okay, so then again, that's an example of how you're claiming confidence wouldn't come into it at all.
Yes, and moreover, can I just add one thing?
Sure, of course.
That if you found the rabbit in the Precambrian, to say that the rabbit in the Precambrian would refute evolution by natural selection leaves you with nothing. If you refute evolution by natural selection, what is the explanation then? What, do you jump to God? Do you say, the creationists were right?
No, you'd have to come up with a better explanation.
Exactly.
Or you'd have to say that the example, that's not a defeasibility or a falsification criterion.
Well, I would just say that you've got nothing else you've got no other way of explaining this rabbit except by saying, well, it must have evolved. Scientists get to work on figuring out what the lineage of this rabbit is.
Again, I'm trying to think of how to frame this without using confidence. Like, I'm trying to think about how, at an individual level, okay, let me do this. Maybe this is easier.
Can I just say, so what Brett said there, I think, unintentionally, is quite a dangerous thing to say. What do I mean by that? I've had a lot of various arguments with various libertarian critical rationalists who insist that Austrian economics is the best explanation of economics. Then I present them with various forms of argument, forms of evidence, forms of contradictions in their own theory. See blog post with Brett there. And they reject all of it. They reject every single thing that could possibly attack their theory because, according to what Brett just said, to get rid of your best explanation is to leave you with nothing. Nothing. If you get rid of your love for libertarianism and for Austrian economics, then you are just in this nihilistic abyss equivalent to not having Darwin's theory of evolution anymore. And so just like Brett is saying that a Darwinian should reject evidence against their theory because if the evidence against their theory was true, then they would have nothing. I have noticed that pattern with a bunch of libertarian crit rats in particular. And it just speaks to the utter subjectivity of what you consider personally to be the best explanation. And also it speaks to the fact that when there's counter evidence coming at you and coming at your explanation, it's often not just from Darwin's theory to just nihilism. It's refining Darwin's theory. It's improving it. It's tweaking it. It's maybe recognizing, to switch back to libertarianism stuff for a sec, it's maybe recognizing that libertarianism just has some important things to say about some things, but there's other economic theories as well that should be integrated in. So this idea that if you accept some some evidence towards your best explanation that you don't like, you're therefore in this nihilistic abyss, is a mental trap that one can tell oneself in order to reject any any evidence to their favorite view. And I just think it's quite dangerous, and it's quite antithetical to the spirit of fallibilism and critical rationalism.
You're the guy who goes out there on the dig, and you're with your buddies, and lo and behold, you discover this. In those moments when you discover it, not would your confidence not be shaken, but would it not be rational for your confidence to be shaken if that were discovered?
The only emotion I would have, and I think most scientists would have at that point, is a massive amount of excitement. Wow, this is a problem. This is exciting. I'm going to be famous because I'm going to be put into the popular science journals tomorrow. People are going to be having me on.
Except that empirically, that was not the reaction when arguments about libertarianism were pointed out. It was not excitement. It was the crossing of arms and the insistence that to attack this explanation is to leave us in a nihilistic abyss. So just refer to blog post for more.
Okay. Excitement is one thing. Would you be surprised?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if you were surprised, then that must mean that your confidence was lower, or you wouldn't be surprised.
No. Every scientist wants to come to a discovery wants to be surprised. They don't want to just go through life just incrementally altering what existing knowledge is. They want to have a problem which they can spend many, many months and years solving. So this rabbit would be an exciting research project for a whole bunch of people, and likely employ a whole bunch of people to figure out this thing, which won't refute evolution by natural selection, but might tell us something really new about how fast evolution happens, for example.
All right. I'll move.
All right. Confidence also it seems to be a religious hangover for me.
Nice. I think that was pretty cool of Peter to move. I think that Brett was essentially offering like a Popperian framing of the same example, which is that contrary evidence creates problems, which allows you to refine the theory, and that is a better lens to view what's going on than simply confidence going up. And he's absolutely right, and that's why I much prefer the Popperian view of this, because the Popperian angle, I think, is much closer to the psychology of most scientists when they're excited to find a discovery against their view. And I just think it gives you many more tools and insights and ways to understand how science works than simply talking in terms of confidence. So good on Brett for highlighting that.
Also, I think something Brett could have highlighted here that he has highlighted before is that the converse wouldn't be tempting to argue for. But Peter's original view would imply it. Namely, if you didn't find a rabbit in the Precambrian, your confidence wouldn't go up. And so, but on a strict, evidentialist notion of how science works, then it should. Because every observation that doesn't invalidate your theory is, logically speaking, more evidence in favor of it.
The whole way of framing epistemology in terms of confidence, belief, how strongly one thinks about something, it seems to be harking back to, you've got to have faith, and the degree of faith that you have tells me how good of a religious person you are, how good of a Christian you are, how likely it is you're going to get into heaven, and that kind of thing. Whereas if you just have the stance that either you've got a good explanation or you don't, your feelings on the matter are utterly irrelevant.
Yeah.
I mean, I get what he's saying there with the echoes to faith and stuff, but at least historically, the whole reason that the empiricists were excited about evidence is partially because they were criticizing the religious prophets who would say you should have faith without any evidence. And if I had to choose between those two positions, I would take the evidence view any day of the week. But then as Popper then built upon that, there's all sorts of problems with an evidence view as well. And that's why he splits with the logical positivists.
Relevant.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
All right. I have another claim.
All right.
Let's go back to neutral. This is a quick one, then I'll go to another one that's connected to this. We should only make decisions based upon knowledge. Go.
When you're making decisions, you either know a thing or don't know a thing, and in the situations that you're talking about, you may have an intuitive feeling that something or other might be the case, in which case, don't do that thing. But I think it still comes down to whether or not you know something or don't know something.
Where would you land on this, actually? Just to play.
I would say yes, obviously, but only because knowledge is such a broad category. Like, my immediate counterexample was, well, it's not just knowledge of the explanation, but also, I don't know, the time you have to make the decision. If you only have a little bit of time, then the time is relevant too. But then you just about say, well, knowing what time you have to make the decision is a kind of knowledge. And so in that way, because knowledge is such an expansive thing, I don't really know what the alternative would be, really. Like, yeah, if you want to do belief and stuff, but it's all just kind of still a form of knowledge, right?
Yeah, if you take a totally all-encompassing view of what knowledge is, I suppose you're right. I would have said no, just based on the word you used earlier, which was stakes of the situation, which I think, like, that's taking, I think, if we're to stick with the spirit of the question, I think that is something that isn't knowledge, or like...
But it's a kind of knowledge, right?
It's a weird, it's an oddly framed question, but I think they mean like object level knowledge of the situation versus sort of meta knowledge of how the world works and uncertainty and downstream consequences and this sort of thing. Yeah,
if that distinction is made, like object level knowledge versus just like contextual situational knowledge, then I agree. You want to include the contextual stuff too, but that is all just kind of a form of knowledge. But anyways, I think we agree.
We'll see where they go.
I'm just thinking about where on this.
Peter slowly walking from agree.
I think I'm here, but I'm not sure.
From neutral to agree.
I'm not sure. I could easily be swayed to go one map to the left or right, because I'm thinking about being in love with someone. Like, I'm thinking about emotional relationships. And I guess if you...
Yeah, what about that? Emotions versus explanations. Maybe that's a bit more of a fine-grained way to distinguish. Should you use emotions and feelings to make decisions? Where, okay, let's exclude the cheap answer, which is both feelings and emotional knowledge is still a form of knowledge. Let's just say that for the purpose of this conversation is not knowledge. So emotions versus explanations. Subjective information versus objective information.
Yeah, for sure. But in a way that I can't tell if I'm dodging the question now. I mean, like, when it comes to who you're going to marry, your subjective,
obviously,
your subjective happiness is obviously like what's sort of at stake there. So clearly, I'm going to listen to that.
Yeah, and also like there's certain decisions that I make because I will feel bad about myself if I make the opposite decision.
Exactly. I
don't entirely know if it's the right decision from a consequentialist lens. Maybe I'm completely ignorant on both sides, but I just have a little internal gut, like, I don't know if I'm going to like the person I am if I do that.
Yeah, like you want to be the kind of person who makes decision X and in scenario Y. Yeah.
So if you... I don't know, I'm just thinking about like what you would have to know. Like, do you know the person isn't like a creep or a pedophile or like some crazy drug addict doing crazy shit or like has some... I don't know, like secret life.
Oh, are you talking about me? Sorry.
Like secret life about, killing people or something you don't know, but I'm thinking about this in terms of romantic relationship.
I love that Peter's always trying to come up with just like some crazy examples.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really respect that.
Even
it's freaking hard to do that too, because every time you're in like a new territory. That's why I always like stumble over my words like every third conversation we have, is because you're like forcing me to think about new shit, and then I have to come up with some new example, and then I can't remember the name of like the wastebasket or something because you're struggling. Yeah.
Emotions are a form of knowledge, or can be regarded as an inexplicit form of knowledge. So oftentimes you might not be able to express in explicit language, write an essay that is completely coherent about why you might be in love, why this person is the person for you. But
confidence is also a form of inexplicit knowledge. right? Everything he's about to say about love. Also, love is one feeling state. Being confident is also a feeling state. And both are
that he may or
forms
may
of
not
implicit.
Still not sure.
Yeah, that's true. That may or may not be relevant, but it is. Oh, I'm going to use that if we ever get to talk to Deutsch again. That confidence is a form of implicit knowledge, because it certainly is, right?
But this is not to deny the fact that things like intuitions, your general feeling, all of these, in my worldview, count as knowledge.
I would say that's correct. Intuition certainly factor into it. I guess I'm kind of caught up on knowledge.
So let's do this claim. For something to count as knowledge, it must be justified, true, and a belief.
Classic.
Go ahead.
Softball question. Yeah.
So, yeah. Where's Gettier when you need him?
Yeah. Oh, nice. Peter and Brett are on the same side. That's good.
See, now we're friends.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the reason that I basically use, so you tell me what you're thinking, then I'll tell you why I think that's just a good kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Knowledge is not justified, not true, and should not be believed. And the example.
Then how come you're not over there?
Well, because I don't believe in degrees of confidence or degrees
then
of...
you don't agree with the whole game then, I guess.
As I said, it's either don't know, or refuse to know. So something like, I know...
Refuse to know.
I know, and every single physics student knows, and this is the one that I beat to like a dead horse. I'm constantly referring to it. Isaac Newton's universal law of gravitation. F equals gm1m2 over r squared. Every single physics student knows it. Every physics professor can recite it. They know it, but they simultaneously know and believe it because it's not true. And there's no possible way of justifying it because it's been refuted by experiment. And yet it counts as knowledge. And almost all of science, in fact, all of science is like that. And not just science, mathematics, morality, and everything.
Okay. So let me now explain why I'm here. So there are many, like in philosophy of Gettier problems. You've written about that, about my story that I posted.
The story was great.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm also here. Let me tell you why we use that. Because I found that most people don't even understand the concept that evidence should play a role in how they live their lives.
That's like a super important point, I think. I think it's hard to get people to swallow wholesale all of the nuances of Popperian epistemology. And like I've used this example in the past, but if you Google like the scientific method, you get a very simplified account, and that to me is like a stepping stone to like a fuller understanding, in the same way that we use like a simplified solar system model to give some very basic intuition about how like electrons and protons and neutrons work. It's like completely wrong, totally, but it's a good like stepping stone. And Peter is often talking to people who just don't have a lot of like debate experience, epistemology experience. And for them, I think if they get the idea in their head that like their confidence should go up as the evidence accumulates, I think it's like a good move away from not having that idea in your head. And so just to echo that, like, they're sorry, maybe to emphasize that if Popperian epistemology is kind of like the final destination, then it totally makes sense to have stepping stones to get there. Like when Georgia gets old enough to know what evidence is, I'm totally going to tell her about, like, yeah, the more evidence you have for something, the more you should believe it to be true, because she's probably won't understand like the nuances of if it doesn't get falsified, you have double negations. It's just like hard to think about, you know. And so just to echo that point.
It's so alien to think about evidence or evaluating and analyzing that when you talk to people on the street, you find that they really are in desperate need of some rudiments of this stuff to help them navigate or make complex decisions in an increasingly complex world. So yeah, I'm on the disagree, but I find that it's very useful. That's a very useful way to frame it. So that, like, you get it, it's usable, it's from Plato's Theaetetus, and you can Yeah, so that's why I do. It's not I'm very conscious of it, though.
Yeah. Look, it's a wonderful escape from authoritarian
how
version.
this relates to the knowledge question. Why does this relate to justified true belief?
That saying that knowledge is justified true belief is a good stepping stone to teach the layman off the street some of the basics of I don't know. The very rudiments of epistemology. It's better to have evidence for your claim.
He's explaining why he's not on fully agree.
I think so. Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
Authoritarian versions of epistemology. Most of our reasoning capacities began in dark tribal religious communities where people were told, believe this based upon my authority as the chief or the medicine man or the priest, and therefore, no evidence is required. So empiricism, for example, the idea that you just get evidence from the looking around and observing the universe was an escape from that kind of authoritarianism. It said to the individual, now you have the power to gather the evidence and to make a decision based upon the evidence without recourse to the priest or the politician or whoever it happens to be with more authority than you. So that was an improvement. However, still false.
Kind of an intellectual Protestantism. Or epistemological Protestantism.
Empiricism, inductivism, all of that stuff, although wrong compared to the kind of epistemology that I'm espousing here, nonetheless is better than just saying that evidence is not important at all.
Yeah, and I want to throw something else out to you. It's more easy for the average person to grasp that. Mm-hmm. And once people grasp that...
Is that true? Can I argue against what I was just saying earlier? What do you think? Let me tell you the sentence that I have in my head, which is, I believe in the beginning of Conjectures and Refutations, he just says that his whole epistemology can be summed into the phrase trial and error. And I don't know if teaching people that knowledge is produced by trying stuff and failing is any harder to grasp than teaching people that knowledge is produced by getting a lot of evidence for the things you believe, right? And if I had to teach only one of those, I would definitely teach the trial and error version. That's why we have the podcast, so obviously. But I don't know. What do you think?
So do you take back what you were saying earlier?
I think I do. Yeah, I think I do. I guess it's in reference to what question, the question is what's the role of evidence? That's a bit more nuanced than just explain your epistemology in a single sentence. So I don't know. I'm kind of waffling between the two positions. I don't really know what I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm always a bit allergic to these sorts of conversations where you have some enlightened individuals that are discussing what the masses can swallow in terms of their epistemology. And I mean, it's different when you're just there's a bunch of people, they don't have time. They haven't heard the word epistemology before. You're giving them a 2-sentence introduction to what epistemology is and how it can improve their lives. That's different. But when you start using phrases I forget what phrase he just used, but there's a little bit of condescension creeping in there, right? What people can grasp or something. I forget exactly what he just said, but there's some people can probably grasp a lot more than you give them credit for, right? It's just whether they have time and interest and whatnot. Yeah.
I fully take back what I said earlier, actually. Yeah, I do. I think that I was being lazy. I think it wouldn't actually be that hard to say that, if you're going to look for evidence, make sure that the evidence could prove you are wrong. I think that would be a very simple thing to say. So I fully take back what I was saying earlier. Yeah, I think it can be explained to a 2-year-old. And I'm going to frickin' do that to Georgia.
Georgia, get in here.
Yeah, we're talking about Popper, baby. Yeah.
Grasp that. Overwhelmingly, they can live a better life. Overwhelmingly.
That evidence is relevant to decisions. Yeah.
Not kind of, moral authority from on high. Just tribalism, what your tribe says.
Don't hand over your critical faculties to someone in a position of authority or to anyone else, really. You need to think for yourself.
So moving people on that scale, I would argue, in the public domain is extraordinarily valuable.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with Brett on this new to me in the past 2 years since the beginning of Infinity, reading that knowledge is resilient information, and it's not something that can start just, as some conjecture in the mind. It's in our genes. It's an objective thing that's instantiated physically in the universe, whether in genes or within a pattern within our minds. That's abstract knowledge, which can be implanted into books and be put on, satellites that go out into the universe. And for it to count as knowledge, it needs to be resilient information. So information that has been checked and criticized, and it stands up to either criticism that uses the physical world to check it through experiment, or just reason broadly, that type of thing. I'm on the track.
That's brilliant. Yeah. The concept of knowledge as being resilient information is so deep and powerful. It actually says that knowledge is the one thing in the universe that will survive far beyond even the most resilient rocks that exist on the universe. So, for example, there are strands of DNA in certain bacteria that have been around for 3.5, 4 billion years. There's no structure on planet Earth that has been around for that long. It's an amazing fact about reality.
I would like to
Yeah, so this is like one of many different definitions that Deutsch has given for what knowledge is. Other variations is knowledge is like information that, when instantiated, tends to remain so. I guess that's kind of synonymous.
Or isn't there one that tends to replicate itself?
There's a replication variant. Yeah, thanks. The problem I have with all of these is that it just kind of locks you into all sorts of counterexamples that you can't easily explain. So I think I got into this maybe with Brett in a group chat somewhere, or maybe with somebody else. But if you take like a knowledge is like useful information that tends to spread, I think that's another variation. Then all of a sudden you have to start including things like astrology and like conspiracy theories and stuff as parts of as knowledge. Stuff that's long been refuted. That picking somebody off the street and you said, "Is astrology knowledge?" Like most people would be like, "No, astronomy is knowledge, but astrology is pseudoscience." Like all sorts of pseudoscientific examples that have been with us for millennia would count under this definition. And then you have to start contorting yourself and saying, well, it is conveying some sort of useful information and is knowledge in a sense. And yet, like, yeah, maybe it's just, I would prefer to just not ever give strict definitions here, because you always get stuck in counterexamples, which is why I refused stubbornly, to the chagrin of Liron, to give a definition of knowledge, because I think that it's much better just to point examples and then talk about how the examples work. And Popper never, ever, ever gave a definition of what knowledge is. And he generalized that critique to say that you should never try to say what something is, because to do that is to start focusing on just words and the relationship between them rather than the real world and understanding how stuff acts. So he says, always replace what is questions, what is knowledge, what is life, what is consciousness, what is love, with how does questions. How does knowledge work? How does life work? How do electrons work under certain conditions? How? It's much better than what.
We should say, so at this point, they're going to do they sort of ended the main segment of the show talking about confidence and epistemology and stuff, and they're just doing a couple rapid fire questions on various things.
It is possible to derive a moral fact from pure reason. So just through reason thought experiments, we can rationally derive certain values that way? That's one example.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can
go
give
ahead.
an argument against that, but that's my current view. I don't understand how someone could be on the slightly for that question. It would seem like that would be a very rare case. I think we could rule out a Matt. So I think in order to talk about morality, you have to have content for that. And I'm thinking about, aliens on a different planet, with a different physiology, subject to different evolutionary conditions. The whole concept wouldn't even make sense. I mean, I guess you could import notions that we've developed, species-centric notions, or I would argue they're species-centric notions, utilitarian notions, deontological notions, but you would have to have some evidence that informed how you would even think about the problem of morality and how you would reason to certain conclusions. But I don't see how you could do that absent any evidence. I mean, maybe I'm limited by my imagination. I don't see how that would be possible.
Mm-hmm. You're taking
I don't know what Brett's going to say, but I think we'll probably be saying something very similar. But this is like such an annoying hobby horse of mine. It's just the word derive has just muddied up this conversation so freaking much over the last 100 years. because it's true that you can't formally, logically derive in the way that mathematicians would derive a statement like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Therefore, that's a strict logical derivation. And all of the Hume can't get a ought from it is business comes from just emphasizing that you can't strictly derive stuff in that formal, truth-preserving way. However, if you replace the word derive with like figure out or intuit or conjecture or is influenced by, if you just lower the requirement for strict derivation, then of course moral claims are dependent upon factual claims, are influenced by, are like, it's just about the word derive, which has caused so much headache in the philosophical and podcast community. And so I don't know what Brett's going to say, but that's just a hobby horse of mine.
Taking a very different road to what I was thinking. Of course, I was triggered, for want of another word, by the word derive.
Derive.
So as soon as the word
It's a wonderful thing to be triggered by the way, because I'm surrounded by people who are triggered by.
Brett and I share this in common. I too am triggered by that word. Yeah.
Asinine things all there. But that's very refreshing that you were triggered by the word derive.
And that's because, again, my epistemological worldview refutes the notion that we derive any kind of facts from anywhere. We don't derive the facts of nature from our observations. We don't derive scientific theories from inductive reasoning, and we don't derive moral facts from pure reason. We don't derive. What we do is we guess at a solution to a problem. So when we encounter a moral conundrum, we go, I wonder what the best thing to do in this particular situation is, and we rule out a whole bunch and we're left with one.
Even then, though, you have...
Spot on answer by Brett, I would say.
Even though you have evidence, like you have a framework to derive something in the first place. Like if I said to you, there are these creatures living in...
Sorry, one other little comment. I remember like second year of my PhD when I was just working through a lot of this stuff, like I had a big frickin' aha moment with regards to what the word derive actually meant. And I'm pretty sure many people haven't had that same realization and use it kind of synonymously with like, go from this information to this other information. Like you just move from here over to here. And just for the listener, be alert for that. I think that Peter doesn't have the logical notion of derive in his head, whereas Brett does. And so just maybe observe that they're going to be talking at slightly different levels, because I don't think Peter is thinking about derive in the strict logical sense.
Living in some, distant galaxy, you have no idea anything about the creatures. You don't even know if they're biomechanical. Like, you have no idea if they're the ancestors of AI. Like, I don't see how you, I don't understand how you could, I don't even understand how you could, but you don't like the word derive. I don't even understand how you could derive a moral fact. Well, we agree they're moral facts, but how could you derive those without some, you would have to, I'm working, like you would have to know something about what you're deriving. Like you'd have to have some context in which that framework is operative.
Yeah. We get the word fact in this particular situation is also ambiguous. Does it mean that there is this sort of abstract reality of in the same way that there are mathematical entities that are out there which stand apart from, that's the subject matter, let's say, of morality or of mathematics. In mathematics, we say the subject matter of mathematics is necessary truth, but it's not the reward we get for doing mathematics. There's a difference between the knowledge created about mathematics and the subject matter of mathematics. And the same might be true of morality as well, that there are these pristine, ideal principles of morality that we don't have direct access to, but we come to guess at and have ideas about and generate moral knowledge about in order to solve particular problems. And that also stands apart from the evidence as well.
Yeah, I guess I was I just fell down an intellectual rabbit hole and thinking, like, you would say about moral expertise, like there's expertise at playing a piano, but you would have to know, or there's expertise in, you would even have to have the concept of music or pianos. Like you can't just, it doesn't come ex nihilo. Like you can't reason to these things in an ontological vacuum.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
So I think we can safely rule out that side of the scale. So then the only question becomes is,
So I think Peter thinks that Brett is saying that, when Brett says that you cannot derive moral facts from objective facts, I think Peter thinks he's saying that you can't use the real world to inform your moral judgments. But that's not what Brett is saying. Brett's making a strict logical point. And that's why Peter's on neutral, because he agrees that you can't derive it from like the formal sense, maybe, but he's struggling with how do you incorporate in like real world information when you're coming up with a moral judgment? To which the answer is you use that information to conjecture what the moral principles are in the same way that you conjecture what the laws of gravitation are. You can't touch gravitation. You can't touch a moral fact like don't torture and kill babies, but both of them are as equally real and informed by what we know about the real world as any other fact that we would operate on.
Where should we be on this side of the scale?
Yeah, I think what we're getting at is we shouldn't think about how we come to any knowledge at all about deriving, from the outside something to get into our brain to know it. We guess it. We guess a solution to a problem we're in, and then we criticize that conjecture, that guess.
Yeah, you guess it, and again, that's why I'm not triggered by anything, but I'm not triggered by derive, because I guess I just look at it, in one sense, I look at it propositionally. And so you have a bunch of propositions, and you're interpreting those propositions, and then you're inferring a moral fact from those.
So inferring is very different than deriving. Inferring, I think what Peter wants to say is just using that information to inform your judgment about some other proposition that you guess is somehow related to the ones that you started with. Inferring that because the burning is building, you should take the kid out of the building is completely fine and reasonable, but that's not deriving it. Deriving it would be some way to logically move in the same way that we can do that with Socrates and mortality to a conclusion that necessarily definitely has to hold in all possible cases. So the use of the word infer as a synonym for derive indicates the confusion on Peter's side, or the confusion on Peter's side with regards to what derive means in the strict formal logical sense, and not in the more colloquial figure it out, infer, get some new information sense, which is kind of the more casual way that one would say derive.
So the derive, that's why I don't have a problem with derive, unless I'm missing something. I could be missing something.
The way I interpret derive, the way in which a mathematician would derive a conclusion. So you start with a whole bunch of axioms and you work through using the rules of inference, get to your conclusion. And so people think that this is how reasoning in general works, that how to be a rational person is to begin with. And so
it's axiomatic, and then, correct.
Yes, and so when people want to eliminate God from the picture or religious moralizing from the picture, quite often what the atheist will do, and I count myself among the atheists, is to replace God and religion and the holy book and the authorities there with a new thing that cannot be questioned. Let's hold up, this is the moral principle, and that cannot be questioned, and from that we will derive all of our other moral facts, and I reject that move.
Yeah, I also think it's this idea of foundationalism in morality is a mistake.
Yes.
But I think it's a kind of vestige from a religious or a different. I'm trying to think of another word from religions, but I think that's the best one, probably in politics to say. But all right, Reed, you want to do that one?
Want to just wrap up in the middle here?
What'd you think of that?
It's an amazing exercise. I like doing sort of stuff like this. It's a lot of fun to just talk to people that have a different view, and especially on the stuff that I'm absolutely fascinated by, which is epistemology. And I know that we don't share all of our epistemology, but I think we are converging on a whole bunch of things. And
I think we converge on the outcomes, the usefulness, the role in one's life. You know what? I wanted to ask you a question. I always say that your epistemology should precede everything, should precede your morality, should be like the first order of business. And before you're an activist, you have to figure out should I be you have to, unless your epistemology is cleaned up, everything else in your life, you could go astray in any one of a number of different directions.
Here to that. Totally.
Yeah.
So I guess the difference that I see is you're operating more in the theoretical or the pure realm, and I'm being soiled by the world. I have a kind of practical, lived, I just want to help people think through problems, and so I don't want to say more pedestrian, but I think I have a less pure, less theoretic approach to it. Do you think that's an accurate characterization?
The bus driver, the builder, the doctor, even the scientist can make a heck of a lot of progress and move throughout their lives by having a false epistemology, and yet they still manage to succeed. It's only on certain niche occasions where it really makes a difference.
Yeah, so let me ask you a question. Do you think that they succeed in their friendships as well? Like if somebody had because I write about this a lot, but Aristotle's concept of friendship, of the highest form of friendship is between two virtuous people. I would argue that I'm not sure one can be virtuous unless one has a reality that somewhat corresponds to reality. I mean, an epistemology that corresponds to reality. I'm thinking like if you were like let's say that somehow you were able to rule out something de facto is false, like, I don't know, you believe in some God and he tells you to do a bunch of things, and you sincerely believe those things and hold those things. I would argue that your friendship with someone, because it wasn't based on something that was real of what a good life actually is, would be corrupted by the fact that your epistemology wasn't as rigorous as it could have been, and you could have had a deeper friendship and deeper relationships with people had you cleaned up your epistemology.
Absolutely.
I would just say in my own life that some of my deepest friendships are with people who have utterly different worldviews and epistemologies than my own. Like one of the things I like about Popper, so you don't, not only do you not require other people to think the same as you, but you hope that they don't think the same as you. So I would just differ with Peter in that sense. I think it would be a shame if you could only really have deep, close friendships with those who read the same books, agreed on the same philosophers, agreed on the same epistemologies. I think that most people, most of the time, are awesome, even if they have a completely different framework and worldview. And I have not found my friendships strained with people who have a totally different worldview than my own.
Yeah, I think Brett was much more correct there when he said epistemology actually usually doesn't matter for most people unless you're operating with some sort of insane system. But it's really, I think it's really the edge cases. It's like the long-termisms and stuff of the world where you start to actually see the big differences in epistemology. For most of the time, walking around day to day, for most of your friends, you're not noticing if they're thinking about evidence in strictly the same way that you're thinking about it.
Yeah, because Popper is descriptive and prescriptive, right? And so whether or not people have read Popper, they are doing conjecture and refutation. They just may not know it, but they are doing it.
Absolutely. And
you agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, of course, it gets worse in the extreme cases where someone becomes religiously super dogmatic, and they might even become, antagonistic towards you or violent in the worst cases and decide to take up, jihadist violence or something. So that's all a consequence of having the wrong epistemology, handing over your critical faculties again to the authority, religious or otherwise.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Reed?
And it was my pleasure. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice to be participating rather than being behind the scenes. It was great.
Yeah, cool. Awesome.
All right. We're done. Heck yeah. Cool. That was fun. Well, I guess to our listeners, if you like this kind of thing, let us know. We'll try to do more of it. To our audio listeners, if it was hard to track without the audio, please let us know. Without the video. Please let us know. We'll try to figure out smoother ways to do that. But yeah. Anything else? Like and subscribe.
Yeah. I don't think it's worth summarizing. We went for long enough, and so we should just leave it at that. But yeah, I think it brought up some extremely interesting territory, and I think the notion of evidence is a fruitful one and a tricky one to think about and to get right. And I'm sure I tripped over myself a few times when trying to explicate my own views, but that's because it's a weedy subject.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, that was lots of fun. Yeah. Hopefully we can do more of these in the future.
Yeah, and send us your criticisms, fine people. You'll be doing that whether or not we request it. But if you have any little sub areas where you strongly disagree with us, please write it out, and we will try to address in future episodes. Awesome. To be continued, Mon Frere.